Hello, and welcome to Edison TV. My name is Aaron Atkar, and I'm a healthcare analyst here at Edison. We're joined today by Dr. Sonya Montgomery, Chief Development Officer here at OSE Immunotherapeutics. OSE is a French-based biotech company covering the broad areas of immuno-oncology and immuno-inflammation. Welcome, Sonya.
Hello, nice to join you.
Thanks. So we're going to focus today on OSE's lead inflammation program, lusvertikimab. But before we get into that, Sonya, first, could you briefly introduce yourself, your background, and tell us what drew you to OSE?
Sure. I'm Dr. Sonya Montgomery. I'm Chief Development Officer at OSE Immunotherapeutics. Throughout my career, I've led clinical development and translational medicine at both large pharma and smaller biotechs, both in North America and here in Europe. Over the past 20 years, I've designed and delivered development programs to study new therapies from bench to bedside. And these have included therapies such as small molecules and biologics, as well as genetic therapies and advanced therapies. I think my focus has been really looking at diseases where there's true unmet medical need. And I've also had the opportunity to collaborate with partnerships with large pharma, as well as with institutions such as Oxford University and Karolinska Institute. Since joining OSE Immunotherapeutics, I've had oversight to the portfolio strategy, which allows me the opportunity to balance the portfolio and also to look to generate value for our key stakeholders, which includes both investors as well as, of course, patients. And I think what really attracted me to OSE was being able to come in and work in immunotherapies with a company who has this really deep expertise in that area that's delivering a first-in-class set of pipeline opportunities and using a technical innovation.
Okay, sounds good. So what would you say is OSE's main area of opportunity?
I think the appeal for me is that we have the ability to deliver therapies with new technologies that are novel mechanisms of action that can either activate or downregulate the immune system and help these patients with true unmet need.
So turning now to OSE's main pipeline activities, can you talk us through the unmet need in ulcerative colitis and IBD?
Sure. Ulcerative colitis, or UC, is what's known as an inflammatory bowel disease, or an IBD. And patients generally are diagnosed when they're young adults, and that can continue throughout their life. They are very much impacted by physical symptoms, and they also experience a higher risk of colorectal cancer that's associated with the severity of their disease or the amount of inflammation. So hence we look for therapies that can target and address that inflammation. There's about 5 million people with UC worldwide, of which about 3 million are in Europe and Japan. And about half of those are living with what we describe as moderate to severe disease, which means it's really impactful on their day-to-day life. There's many new therapies, new agents that are being developed to address this immune inflammation. However, there's a widely acknowledged therapeutic ceiling where only 25 to 30% of patients who are treated with these agents experience clinical remission with their first line of treatment, and then of those, only about half of them are able to maintain that benefit over time and maintain that remission. So there is still a good amount of unmet need.
Perfect. So following on from this, can you talk to us about the potential market opportunity in the space?
From a commercial perspective, estimates put the market at over $7 billion with a 4% compound annual growth rate. So it's a disease that's expanding and increasing in diagnosis across the world. There are other factors that impact the disease, such as genetics or environmental conditions for patients. So the way that their lifestyle and or where they live. Sure. So there's not one line of a therapy that will solve this for all patients. So there is space for multiple lines of therapies. However, if you can have a treatment that's established as a first line therapy, that would of course provide a significant advantage from a commercial perspective. Based on OSE's research so far, we believe lusvertikimab has the potential to represent an opportunity of up to $3 billion across 7 major markets by focusing on as a first-line therapy in potential subpopulations.
So lusvertikimab recently completed a phase 2 trial in ulcerative colitis. Could you talk us through some of the key takeaways from that trial?
Absolutely. We studied lusvertikimab in the colitis phase 2 clinical trial, and we included 134 people who had that moderate to severe ulcerative colitis definition. So patients with ongoing symptoms who had not responded to either the standard of care or to biologics. We had an induction phase of 10 weeks where patients received either a low dose or a high dose of lusvertikimab, 450 milligrams or 850 milligrams, or placebo. And we had those patients were randomized. We then assessed them at the start and then at week 10 and looked to see how their disease progressed over that 10 weeks. What we found was that we had a clinically and statistically meaningful result at week 10, where on the primary endpoint, so the endpoint for efficacy that we assessed, which was the modified Mayo score, we saw a difference in the combined population of the lusvertikimab patients of a drop in 1 point on severity on that MMS score as compared to placebo, so patients who are not receiving any additional therapy. We also looked at clinical remission, and that is both the symptoms that the patients are experiencing as well as looking at, is there healing in their colon tissue, so looking on biopsy. And at 10 weeks, we saw that 16% of patients who received lusvertikimab saw that clinical remission of their symptoms, and only 4% of the placebo patients experienced that. So there was a nice difference and a clinically meaningful difference between our treated population of lusvertikimab and the placebo group. We then offered to patients the opportunity to continue if they chose and do what's called an open label extension. And at that point, all patients went on to the high dose of lusvertikimab, the 850 milligrams. Almost all patients chose to continue, which we like to see. And then after that further 24 weeks of treatment at the high dose, we saw that more than 90% of the people who had resolved their symptoms at the end of the induction phase or at that week 10 time point maintained that remission of symptoms through that extra 6 months, and that those who hadn't responded at 61% of those who hadn't responded at week 10 did actually manage to achieve symptomatic remission in that population when receiving lusvertikimab at the high dose. We saw also when we looked at the placebo patients, and they then started on for the first time lusvertikimab at that week 10 time point, then continued for an additional 24 weeks on lusvertikimab, 82% of those patients achieved symptomatic remission by the end of the OLE. We also, of course, really important to assess safety and tolerability in a clinical study. And we saw that there was no difference to placebo in serious adverse events through the induction phase. And we also saw a similar good safety profile throughout that open label extension period with all patients on the high dose. I would say the takeaway for me of that open label extension is that we continue to see benefit on symptoms through week 14 and then nice maintenance throughout that additional 6 months.
Okay. So looking ahead, can you talk to us about the predictive biomarker potential to overcome the therapeutic ceiling and what a precision medicine approach might look like?
Yes. So we announced in June of 25, so this year, a new biomarker that we've identified that when we see it positive in a subpopulation is predictive of a higher clinical response based on the colitis data. We have research and translational groups that took a foundational model and utilized data, a broad amount, millions of patients' data with an inflammatory disease diagnosis, and trained it using AI, and then from that utilized the data from the colitis study to be able to characterize a predictive biomarker that supported clinical remission in these patients. We found that of the 30% of the patients who in the study had this positive predictive biomarker, they had a 59% rate of clinical remission, which when we compare to that therapeutic ceiling of 25 to 30%, obviously is a much higher population percentage. Importantly, no one who was negative for the biomarker experienced clinical remission in that first 10 weeks. So I think what's that sensitivity of that biomarker supports that patients wouldn't, by being selected with the biomarker, necessarily miss out on an opportunity for treatment. So I think that's quite important when you're
Sure.
developing a biomarker. I think it also kind of reinforces or supports the potential for lusvertikimab as a first-line therapy in that subpopulation, and as a monotherapy, and with the commercial advantage that it brings to a company.
So thanks very much. Before we wrap up today, could you just briefly summarize for us the key upcoming catalysts that investors should watch out for?
Well, looking specifically at lusvertikimab, we are taking all of the data that we've acquired through our phase 2 program, including the predictive biomarker data, and we are developing the next program, a phase 2b study, where we would look to characterize the dosing regimen and dose, look to integrate subcutaneous formulation into the program, and subject to securing necessary financing, of course. And we'd also look to confirm this predictive biomarker and see, across the broad population, what does our clinical remission rates look like, as well as do we then confirm that we have this subpopulation where we can achieve this breakthrough of the therapeutic ceiling. As of course, progressing to pivotal studies is more costly and they're much bigger. Generating this data in a phase 2b study would support partnering for those phase 3 pivotal programs that would then lead to potential for registration.
Great. So what does this all add up to for lusvertikimab?
With the data we have generated to date, we are confident that this multi-billion-dollar market segment is one with potential for a differentiated new novel mechanism of action therapy like for lusvertikimab.
Thanks very much. That's all the time we have today, but if our audience would like to learn more, please take a look at the research we have accessible at edisongroup.com. Sonya, thanks very much for joining me today.
Lovely to speak to you. Bye.
Thanks.